Henry was just 12, walking home from the park with his backpack slung over one shoulder when everything changed. The quiet street, the white fences, the manicured lawns, it all looked safe, but it wasn't. From the entrance of the neighborhood, HOA security guard Mike Dawson locked eyes on him. His posture stiffened. His hand twitched toward his holster. In that instant, Henry went from a kid heading home to a suspect in his own neighborhood, and Dawson was ready to act. Before we continue the story, please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on your notifications for more daily stories. Drop a comment to let us know which city or country you're watching from. Dawson stepped out from the security booth, his gait purposeful as he intercepted Henry near the corner of Oak Ridge Lane. "Hey you! Stop right there," he barked, voice sharp and commanding. Henry froze, confusion flickering across his face as he turned to face the man blocking his path. Henry's eyes widened slightly, but he kept his composure. "I live here," he said calmly, though the nervous edge in his voice was unmistakable. "I'm just walking home from the park." He tried to step around Dawson, but the guard shifted to block his way again. "I don't recognize you," Dawson said, his suspicion now bordering on hostility. "Show me some ID." Henry's heart pounded in his chest. He reached into his pocket, but before he could produce anything, Dawson's demeanor hardened further. "No sudden moves," he warned. His hand moved toward the holster at his hip, fingers brushing the grip of his gun. The tension thickened, the quiet suburban street now charged with unease. "Sir, I'm not causing any trouble," Henry said steadily, raising his hands slightly in a gesture of peace. "I live here. You can ask anyone." But Dawson wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on Henry, filled with suspicion that seemed impermeable to reason. Just then, a car pulled up at the end of the street, its tires crunching on the gravel driveway of the house nearby. Robert, Henry's father, stepped out, alerted by a neighbor who had witnessed the interaction and called him immediately. Robert was a tall, imposing man with a calm but commanding presence, his military haircut and strong build hinting at a disciplined past. He approached the scene briskly, his face set with concern. "What's going on here?" Robert asked, voice steady but firm as he reached his son's side. Dawson turned to face him, not expecting the arrival of someone who radiated authority. "This boy was wandering around the neighborhood, and I asked for ID," Dawson replied defensively. "He couldn't show me any, so I'm just making sure he's supposed to be here." Robert's gaze locked onto Dawson's, his tone low and controlled but carrying an unmistakable weight. "My son lives here. He was at the park, coming straight home." He reached out to put a steadying hand on Henry's shoulder. "You don't need to treat him like a suspect." Dawson's jaw tightened, the tension between the two men crackling like static in the air. "I'm just doing my job," he said, though his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty now that Robert was involved. Henry's mother, hearing the commotion, stepped out of the house and hurried over. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. She glanced between her husband, son, and the security guard, sensing the escalation. Robert turned to her briefly before addressing Dawson again. "You're creating a problem where there isn't one. This is my family's home." His calm demeanor masked the protective fire burning beneath. The guard's hand remained near his gun holster, his body tense and ready, but now uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The neighborhood, once a backdrop of quiet normalcy, was now the stage for a charged confrontation. Neighbors began to peek out from their windows and doorways, drawn by the raised voices and palpable tension. Henry stood quietly beside his father, his heart racing but determined not to show fear. He had been raised to respect authority, but he also knew when something felt wrong. Dawson's suspicion, fueled by nothing more than appearances, was threatening to turn a simple walk home into a dangerous ordeal. The scene was a collision of worlds, a young black boy's ordinary day intersecting with a security guard's heightened sense of vigilance, sharpened by bias and fear. The quiet suburban street had become a place where assumptions were tested, and the thin veneer of safety was beginning to crack. As Robert calmly but firmly instructed Dawson to step back and reassess the situation, the guard hesitated. The presence of an authoritative figure, a man who clearly understood the dynamics at play, shifted the balance, but did not yet resolve the tension. Henry's mother moved closer to her son, her protective instinct on high alert. The neighbors watching from their porches exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering among themselves, others simply observing with silent concern. The incident was unfolding quickly, and the question on everyone's mind was how far it would escalate before reason prevailed. In this moment, the familiar streets of the gated community felt less like a safe haven and more like a battleground where misunderstandings, fear, and prejudice clashed. Henry's walk home had been interrupted by suspicion and confrontation, setting the stage for a deeper reckoning with the realities beneath the neighborhood's polished surface. Robert's voice cut through the charged atmosphere, steady and commanding. "Mike, you need to lower that weapon right now." His calm was a stark contrast to the tension radiating from the security guard. Dawson's eyes flickered with uncertainty, his hand lingering near his gun, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on him. Robert took a step forward, his stature imposing yet controlled. "You don't want to escalate this any further." The statement wasn't a threat, but a clear assertion of authority born from experience and discipline. Dawson's posture stiffened, a mix of shock and hesitation crossing his face as he absorbed the gravity of what Robert had revealed. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Henry looked up at his father with a mixture of pride and relief, sensing the shift in power dynamics. Robert's presence was more than just that of a concerned parent. It was the presence of a man trained to handle conflict with precision and control. Dawson's fingers finally eased away from the gun. His shoulders sagged slightly, the bravado that had fueled his initial aggression deflating under Robert's composed command. I didn't know," he stammered, eyes darting around as if seeking an escape from the situation he had unintentionally worsened. Robert kept his gaze locked on the security guard. "You need to understand the responsibility that comes with carrying that weapon. This isn't a game, Mike." His tone was firm but not unkind, a mixture of admonishment and an unspoken offer of guidance. "You almost made a terrible mistake today." With deliberate movements, Robert stepped closer and reached for Dawson's holstered gun. The guard tensed instinctively but did not resist. In a fluid motion born of countless drills and real-life encounters, Robert disarmed him, securing the weapon safely out of reach. The gesture was both symbolic and practical, a clear demonstration of control and expertise. Neighbors who had gathered now murmured amongst themselves, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. The sight of the security guard being disarmed by a civilian was unexpected, and the revelation of Robert's identity added layers of complexity to the unfolding drama. Henry's mother moved beside her husband, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "We just want our son to be safe." Robert nodded, his focus unbroken. Safety isn't just about fences and gates. It's about respect and understanding. He turned back to Dawson. "You need to rethink how you approach your job. Profiling someone based on appearance doesn't keep this community safe. It puts everyone at risk." Dawson swallowed hard, the reality of his actions settling heavily on his conscience. He looked around at the neighbors, now watching intently, their faces reflecting a mix of disappointment and expectation. The man who had seemed so confident moments before was now visibly shaken, confronted by the consequences of his behavior. One of the neighbors, a middle-aged woman named Karen, stepped forward cautiously. "Mike, this isn't the first time we've seen you act this way," she said quietly but firmly. "We've noticed you're quick to suspect people who don't look like you. It's making folks uncomfortable." The crowd murmured in agreement, a ripple of acknowledgement spreading through the group. The security guard's role, meant to protect and serve the community, was now under scrutiny not just for today's incident, but for a pattern that many residents had silently endured. Robert looked at Karen, then back at Dawson. This community deserves security that's fair and respectful. That means training, accountability, and a commitment to treating every resident with dignity. His words resonated with the neighbors, who nodded in quiet support. Dawson nodded slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "You're right," he admitted. "I need to do better." There was a flicker of humility in his voice, a crack in the armor he had built around his authority. The tension that had gripped the street began to ease, replaced by a cautious sense of resolution. Robert holstered the gun and took a step back, signaling an end to the immediate confrontation. He turned to his family, his protective instinct still strong but tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning of a larger challenge. Henry looked up at his father with gratitude, the fear that had gripped him moments before now replaced by a sense of safety. "Thanks, Dad," he said softly. Robert smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Always, son, always." The neighbors began to disperse slowly, conversations sparking among them about what had just transpired. The incident had exposed deep-seated issues within the community, issues of trust, bias, and the true meaning of security. Robert knew that today's event was a catalyst, a moment that would prompt reflection and, hopefully, change. As he walked his family back toward their home, he kept a steady gaze on the street, aware that the road ahead would require vigilance and leadership. The revelation of his Navy SEAL background had shifted the balance, but the real work was just beginning. Behind them, Dawson remained near the entrance, quietly reconsidering his approach. The guard's initial bravado had been replaced by a new awareness of the responsibility his role demanded. The neighborhood's trust was fragile, and earning it back would take more than just a badge and a gun. The community's eyes were now open, watching closely as the dynamics of power and protection were challenged and reshaped. Robert's intervention had prevented a potential tragedy, but it also highlighted the urgent need for change not just in security practices but in the attitudes and assumptions that governed them. In this pivotal moment, the neighborhood stood at a crossroads. The confrontation had revealed the fractures beneath the surface, but it also ignited a spark of hope that through accountability and understanding, the community could move toward a safer and more inclusive future. News of the incident spread swiftly through the neighborhood, carried by whispered conversations and concerned phone calls. The tension that had simmered beneath the surface for months began to rise, as residents shared their own unsettling encounters with the HOA security. The pattern was clear. Mike Dawson's behavior was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader issue of racial profiling and aggressive tactics that had long gone unchallenged. Robert found himself at the center of a growing movement. Invitations arrived for community meetings, emails flooded his inbox, and neighbors stopped him in the street to voice their frustrations. Mothers spoke of their children being followed closely by guards. Elderly residents recounted feeling intimidated during routine walks. Young adults shared stories of being questioned or confronted without cause. The collective experience painted a troubling picture of a community divided by fear and mistrust. Determined to channel this unrest into meaningful action, Robert organized the first neighborhood meeting at the community center. The room filled quickly, a diverse crowd representing the fabric of the neighborhood families, retirees, professionals, all brought together by a shared desire for change. The air was thick with emotion, anger, anxiety, hope, all mingling as residents prepared to confront the system that had failed them. Robert stood before the group, his presence commanding attention. "We can't let this continue," he began, voice steady but impassioned. "Our community deserves security that protects everyone fairly, without bias or fear." He recounted the incident with Dawson, not as a tale of confrontation, but as a catalyst for action. "This is about more than one guard or one family. It's about holding our HOA accountable and demanding transparency." Hands shot up as neighbors shared their experiences. A young mother described how her teenage son was stopped multiple times while walking home from school, always treated with suspicion. An elderly man spoke of being told he didn't belong in his own neighborhood because of the way he looked. Each story added weight to the growing call for reform. Robert listened carefully, taking notes and encouraging others to document every encounter. "We need evidence," he explained. "If we're going to challenge the status quo, we have to present a clear, united front with facts and testimonies." The group agreed to form a committee dedicated to investigating the HOA's security practices. They planned to collect written statements, review security footage, and request records of complaints filed against guards. The goal was to build a comprehensive case that exposed the systemic issues and pressured the HOA board to enact change. Media attention soon followed. Local news outlets caught wind of the story, drawn by the combination of community activism and the involvement of a Navy SEAL. Reporters arrived at meetings, interviewed residents, and highlighted the growing concerns about racial profiling within private security forces. The narrative shifted from a single incident to a broader conversation about justice, equality, and the responsibilities of those entrusted with public safety. City officials took notice as well. Complaints filed by residents prompted inquiries into the HOA's oversight of security personnel. Questions arose about training protocols, hiring practices, and the mechanisms in place to address misconduct. The scrutiny placed additional pressure on the HOA board, forcing them to confront the unrest within their community. Despite the mounting attention, some residents expressed frustration at the slow pace of change. "We've been hearing promises for years," one woman said during a follow-up meeting, "but nothing ever really shifts." Robert acknowledged the skepticism but emphasized the importance of persistence. "Change takes time," he said, "but our voices are louder now, and we have the power to make a difference if we stay united." The committee worked tirelessly, compiling reports and coordinating with civil rights organizations to understand the legal avenues available. They held workshops to educate residents about their rights and how to safely document interactions with security personnel. The community began to see itself as a force for accountability rather than passive observers. Tensions remained, however. Dawson continued to patrol the neighborhood, his presence a reminder of the unresolved conflict. Some residents avoided walking near him, while others confronted him directly, demanding answers and respect. The guard's demeanor shifted subtly, less overtly aggressive, but still marked by an undercurrent of defensiveness. Robert met privately with HOA officials, presenting the collected evidence and urging immediate reforms. He called for comprehensive training focused on implicit bias, de-escalation techniques, and cultural sensitivity. Additionally, he pushed for the establishment of an independent oversight committee to review complaints and ensure transparency. The HOA board, under increasing pressure, agreed to some changes but resisted full accountability. Their statements emphasized the need for security but stopped short of acknowledging systemic bias. This half-measure fueled further frustration among residents, who saw it as an attempt to placate rather than address the core issues. As community meetings continued, Robert reminded neighbors of the importance of solidarity. "We have to stand together," he urged. "Our strength is in our numbers and our stories. When we unite, we can hold those in power responsible." The narrative of the neighborhood was evolving from a place defined by suspicion and division to one of collective empowerment and advocacy. Residents who once felt isolated in their experiences began to find common ground, recognizing that their struggles were interconnected. Through persistent effort, the community began to reclaim its sense of safety and belonging. The movement was no longer just about one guard or one incident. It was about reshaping the culture of security to reflect the values of fairness, respect, and inclusion. Robert's leadership became a beacon for many, inspiring neighbors to take active roles in the ongoing fight for justice within their own streets. The story that had started with a tense confrontation now unfolded as a broader call to action, highlighting the power of community resilience in the face of systemic challenges. The journey was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. With each meeting, each shared story, and each documented complaint, the neighborhood moved closer to the accountability and reform it sought. The residents were no longer silent witnesses, but active participants in shaping the future of their community. Robert stood before the HOA board in the community center's meeting room, the air thick with anticipation and frustration. Neighbors filled the seats behind him, their faces set with determination. The room, once a place for routine discussions about landscaping and pool rules, was now the battlefield for a deeper fight, one for fairness, respect, and accountability. "Today we are here to demand change," Robert began, his voice steady and unwavering. "The security practices in this community have failed us. The profiling, intimidation, and lack of proper oversight cannot continue. We need transparency in hiring, comprehensive bias training for all security personnel, and an independent body to review complaints. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Some shifted in their chairs, others avoided eye contact. The chairman, a middle-aged man with a polished demeanor, cleared his throat. "We appreciate your concerns, Mr. Harris," he said, trying to maintain a tone of civility. "However, our security team operates under strict guidelines, and we believe they are doing their job to ensure the safety of all residents." Robert shook his head slightly. "Respectfully, that's not what the community has experienced. We have documented incidents, eyewitness accounts, and growing distrust. Safety built on fear and bias is no safety at all." He gestured toward the crowd behind him. "These are your residents, your neighbors. We deserve better." The meeting quickly grew heated. Board members defended their position, citing budget constraints and the challenges of managing private security within a gated community. But the residents were unyielding. Voices rose as individuals shared personal stories of harassment, discrimination, and fear. The collective weight of these testimonies was undeniable. Local media had been invited to cover the meeting, and cameras captured the charged exchange. Reporters asked pointed questions, pressing the board on their response to allegations of racial profiling and the adequacy of their oversight. The spotlight intensified the pressure, making it clear that the issue could no longer be swept under the rug. City officials, prompted by the growing public outcry, initiated a formal review of the HOA's security contracts and policies. They requested records, incident reports, and training documentation. The inquiry aimed to assess whether the HOA was meeting its obligations to protect residents without infringing on their rights. Meanwhile, Robert and the committee continued to organize, filing formal complaints with the police department regarding Dawson's conduct. The investigation into the guard's behavior gained momentum, leading to his suspension pending the outcome. This action was a tangible acknowledgement that the community's concerns were valid and warranted serious attention. Despite these developments, the HOA board resisted calls for a complete overhaul. They proposed incremental changes, additional training sessions, a revised code of conduct, but stopped short of establishing an independent oversight committee. Their statements emphasized a commitment to safety but fell short of addressing the systemic issues residents highlighted. The residents, led by Robert, saw these measures as insufficient. They pressed for binding agreements and enforceable policies that would ensure ongoing accountability. "We need guarantees, not promises," Robert told the board during a follow-up meeting. "Our trust has been broken, and rebuilding it requires action, not lip service." Tensions remained high as negotiations continued. Some board members expressed frustration, viewing the residents' demands as disruptive. Others began to recognize the legitimacy of the grievances and the potential consequences of ignoring them, not only in terms of community harmony, but also legal liability. In the neighborhood streets, the atmosphere was still tense. Dawson's suspension temporarily eased the immediate fear, but questions about who would replace him and how the HOA would prevent similar issues remained unresolved. Residents continued to watch closely, documenting interactions and staying vigilant. Robert met regularly with community leaders and civil rights advocates, strategizing ways to maintain pressure on the HOA and local government. They planned public forums, awareness campaigns, and legal consultations to ensure the momentum for change did not wane. The media coverage brought broader attention to the story, sparking conversations in neighboring communities about the role of private security and the risks of unchecked authority. Robert's leadership became a symbol of grassroots activism, inspiring others to challenge injustice in their own neighborhoods. As the legal and administrative processes unfolded, the community grappled with the complexities of effecting change within established systems. The battle was no longer just about a single guard or incident. It had evolved into a struggle to redefine the values and practices governing their shared space. Throughout it all, Robert remained a steady presence, organizing, advocating, and uniting residents. His military background and calm authority lent credibility and confidence to the movement, helping neighbors find their voices and stand firm in their demands. The HOA board's partial concessions marked a tentative step forward, but underscored the need for continued vigilance. The community understood that true reform would require sustained effort, transparency, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. In this critical phase, the neighborhood was transformed from a passive bystander in its own affairs to an active agent of change. The fight for equitable security was no longer a private dispute, but a public challenge to systemic bias and institutional complacency. Robert and the residents prepared for the next steps: legal battles, policy advocacy, and community organizing, knowing that the path ahead would be difficult but necessary. Their determination signaled a turning point, a refusal to accept the status quo, and a commitment to building a safer, more just neighborhood for all. The neighborhood began to breathe easier, the weight of fear and suspicion slowly lifting, as residents rallied together in a renewed spirit of empowerment. Robert stood at the forefront, his leadership having transformed a fractured community into a united front, demanding justice and respect. The changes that had been fought for were beginning to take root, signaling a new chapter for the streets they all called home. With Dawson removed from his post, the HOA faced the immediate task of rebuilding trust. The community had insisted on hiring a new security team, one vetted not only for experience, but also for integrity and sensitivity. Training programs were overhauled, focusing heavily on cultural competency, de-escalation tactics, and the importance of treating every resident with dignity. These sessions were open to the public, allowing residents to witness the commitment firsthand and hold the security team accountable. Robert took an active role in these efforts, attending training sessions alongside neighbors, offering insights from his military background, and fostering dialogue between residents and security personnel. His involvement helped bridge gaps, turning wary eyes into cautious optimism. "It's about creating a culture, not just enforcing rules," he would often say, emphasizing respect as the foundation of safety. The Independent Oversight Committee was established, staffed by community members and external advisors committed to transparency. This body reviewed complaints, monitored security practices, and provided regular reports to the HOA and residents alike. Its presence was a powerful reassurance that abuses of power would no longer be tolerated or hidden. Neighborhood meetings continued, but the tone had shifted. Instead of fear and frustration, there was a palpable sense of hope and collaboration. Residents shared ideas for community-building events, neighborhood watch programs, and initiatives to foster inclusivity. The once divided streets were now alive with conversations about unity and shared responsibility. Robert's family, too, found solace in the progress. Henry returned to his daily routines without the shadow of suspicion hanging over him. His mother smiled more easily, and the family felt a renewed sense of security within their own home. The ordeal that had begun with a tense confrontation had evolved into a catalyst for lasting change, strengthening their bonds with neighbors and the community at large. The story of their neighborhood's transformation attracted attention beyond the gates. Local organizations reached out to collaborate, offering resources and support to sustain the momentum. Robert spoke at forums and panels, sharing the lessons learned and inspiring others to stand against injustice in their own communities. Yet, the journey was not without its challenges. Vigilance remained essential, as old attitudes sometimes resurfaced, and the work of maintaining equity required constant effort. Robert and his neighbors were committed to this ongoing responsibility, understanding that true safety was built on trust, respect, and accountability. The narrative that had once been dominated by fear and division now celebrated courage and resilience. The community had reclaimed its voice and its power, proving that collective action could confront systemic issues and foster real change. Through their struggle, the neighborhood became a testament to the strength found in unity. Residents learned that standing together against injustice not only protected their rights, but also enriched their shared lives. The lessons of their experience echoed beyond their streets, a reminder that courage and determination could shape a more just future. Robert looked out over a block party that had brought the community together, children playing freely, neighbors sharing food and laughter, security personnel mingling with residents in a spirit of cooperation. It was a scene that spoke of healing and hope. the embodiment of what they had fought to achieve. As the sun set behind the tree-lined streets, Robert felt a quiet pride. The fight had been difficult, and the path ahead would still hold challenges, but the neighborhood had emerged stronger, united by a common purpose and a renewed commitment to fairness. In this moment, the story was far from over. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of standing up, speaking out, and coming together to build a community where everyone could feel safe, respected, and truly at home. Thanks for watching. If you loved the story, like the video and please subscribe.